what you are doing is kidnapping someone if you arrest them for a victimless crime. The fact that some people in the Nixon administration wrote words down on paper, you can now arrest people for drug offenses. That doesn't change the nature of a kidnapping. I mean, just imagine if another country passed a law and then enforced it on us. You wouldn't just say, well, they did pass it. Well, it was democratic.
From Anarchapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I've got a great first-time guest coming in. I met him at recently at Anarchist, which was in Sedona, Arizona, about a month ago. Great guy, a young guy who started a YouTube channel a couple years ago called Don't Tread on Anyone. And I met him and I checked out some of his videos. I thought, yeah, this guy really is really good stuff. He's got a lot of great stuff on his channel. We're going to get into the philosophy of anarchy more. I know some people, especially at Anarchapulco last year, some people said there wasn't enough on the philosophy of anarchy and actually just talking about anarchism itself. And real sort of part of the reason is that most of us kind of get it now. It's not as necessary to be just harping on all the details of the philosophy as much. It's more important for a lot of us to start moving forward and actually putting those implementing them into the world and things like that. But at the same time, the philosophy is still incredibly important. And Keith does a great job. He's done a number of great videos. Check out his channel. We'll have the link to that down below, and you can check it out. So, Keith, it's a pleasure to have you on. You're coming in from Phoenix, Arizona. And but the first question I have to ask you, though, is how did you become an anarchist?
I became an anarchist after many, many years of being a statist. I originally supported Barack Obama in 2008. I was very passionate about the idea that we can help people. Simply, the state is a mechanism to help the less fortunate or another way to achieve ends in society. And then I just started hate watching someone like Glenn Beck. And then he made the point that the Affordable Care Act, you can look at the costs and benefits and the unintended economic consequences, but there was something in the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that mandated that you bought insurance. And I'm just like, that seems immoral. You shouldn't be forced to buy something against your will. Even if it's for your own good, you shouldn't be forced to exercise or forced to eat healthy, even if it's for your own good. So it took me like 5 years to apply that consistently, that simple principle, unfortunately. I then came across the works of Tom Woods and Larkin Rose, and just finally having a philosophy that was consistent really helped me push things forward. So even though I would look at something like the minimum wage and say, well, yeah, increasing the cost of employment hurts people with the least amount of skills and the least amount of experience. It hurts smaller businesses and can create oligopolies. But still, if I want to work or have an internship or be an entrepreneur for $0 an hour for months, I still have that right. So it was also the works of Hans Hoppe, I got to say, were pretty influential. So I became an anarchist. Simply, I just ran out of excuses for when initiating violence against peaceful people is justified. I'm like, all right, I can initiate violence for a court system. Does anyone have that right, or does government have a monopoly on that right? God damn it, I was so close. I just thought I had this thing. But police, you have to be able to defend yourself. So any security organization can force you to fund them if they engage in security. Oh, son of a bitch, I thought I had it there. The only rational, moral, consistent view of the world is the anarchist one, where no person or group of persons has the right to coercively rule over another. And as many friends as it lost me, I really had to buckle down and say, I've got to choose truth and virtue over popularity or something like that. That was my painful journey onto becoming an anarchist.
Wow, that's a great story, and very interesting that you were into Barack Obama, and then the Obamacare thing kind of made you realize, hey, wait a sec, that's not really cool to be forcing people to do stuff. So I'm kind of curious if you remember what it is that sort of drew you to Barack Obama at the time, because obviously you weren't like a hardcore socialist, because if you were, you would have looked at the Obamacare thing and said, oh, that's great, yeah, force it on everyone, that'll be awesome. So I'm kind of curious, did you just fall into it because you were just a younger guy and it was cool to like Barack Obama at the time, or was there any other reason?
Well, one of the many great tricks the statist magician pulls is being able to hide the gun in the room. We should have college for everyone. It's like, okay, so I'm looking at a thing that you're getting, college or education or healthcare. You don't see where it's coming from. If they were honest, they'd say we should be able to violently expropriate peaceful and allocate those funds to pursue education or healthcare. So the fact that I never even saw the gun was a main purpose in, supporting something. I go, healthcare, what's wrong with giving people things? I mean, how can you be against giving people healthcare? What kind of evil psycho are you? So it was, I didn't see the gun when it was there. When had any other organization done it, I would have seen it. I could see it when other countries do it. I'm like, that country forces things amongst their populace. Haha, they live in tyranny. I'm in free America. So that was probably the major thing. Another thing is Michael Malice brings to your attention very often that why don't people just pursue their ends? Instead, they go through politics. Why is it, what is the difference between doing something in the market and doing something through the state? And the heart of that disagreement lies in the fact that if you could pursue people, if you could convince people voluntarily, that's where you would achieve a market in something. That is the nature of the state, to coerce you. So once that was pointed out, I just couldn't go back, and I just kept following the anarchist trail to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned a little bit earlier that in this process of turning from a statist to an anarchist, I think you used the word it was difficult or hard or something kind of negative about it. What was it that was sort of like so difficult for you about this transition?
It's really difficult when you have all of your friends that are sort of in the same ideological camp. So what you're saying, it's not like, turns out I'm liking Godfather Part 2 more than Part 1. It's actually like, hey, if we go down this road, what we're doing is advocating violence, literally violence, and also the unintended consequences of giving a group a monopoly on violence and letting them steal trillions of dollars annually. Like, that would go bad anyways. And there's 6,000 or so years of history of governments engaging in, slavery, genocide, mass theft, and whatnot. It was really hard to sort of tell people, hey, this thing we've been doing, advocating statism, I think we're going about it incorrectly. Also, when you have friends and family in the police and military, they'll come up to you and say things like, well, you're into politics, but you still respect me as a public servant, right? It's so hard. It's great to tweet at them because then I'm like, I got all this power. I don't have to look them in the eye. But when you really know someone, it's like, oh my gosh, well, what you are doing is kidnapping someone if you arrest them for a victimless crime. The fact that some people in the Nixon administration wrote words down on paper, you can now arrest people for drug offenses. That doesn't change the nature of a kidnapping. Just imagine if another country passed a law and then enforced it on us. You wouldn't just say, well, they did pass it. Well, it was democratic. And you'd come up with all these excuses. You'd say, that is inherently immoral. And that's really when the rubber meets the road with a lot of your friendships. So it's not just, as much as you want to pursue truth and all this stuff, when people look at you like, oh, that guy, he doesn't even appreciate the state, this guy, he doesn't even support education. That is a really big hurdle that you have to go through when you're trying to develop a philosophy. And then when you start making YouTube videos and they're like, what the hell was that about? What do you mean Julian Assange shouldn't be in jail? He put people at risk. I go, did the murderers in the collateral murder video put anyone at risk? If some other country did that to us, are you telling me you'd be like, well, we really got to protect the murderers? What mindset do you have to be in to where you see a murder take place and go, gosh, I hope this doesn't get out? That's just insanity. So really putting the pressure on relationships in your life and telling people what they're advocating is immoral. The minimum wage is killing people's opportunity to get their foot in the door. For example, you will get shot if you don't render the state the monopoly on AR-15s so many leftists want. or if I don't fund this war in Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, they're going to come put you in a cage and shoot you if you resist. You're telling me that you support them forcing me to fund it? I just want to opt out and give everyone else the right to opt out. So that I had to say was the most difficult part, really telling people the reality of what they believed. And so many of them are older than I am. They're in their 40s, and they've never thought about holding government to the same standards we'd hold any other organization.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. They're all basically brainwashed. That's the main issue here. But you bring up a really interesting thing. I think this is of interest to quite a few people, and I really realized that this year at Anarchapulco, it was a lot of like new anarchists this year, which I wasn't fully expecting. A lot of people just became anarchists in the last year, and they found out about Anarchapulco, and they came. And I saw a lot of it in the chat boards and stuff, people having real issues with, now that I believe this, I have major problems with my friends and my family. It's like massive problems. So I'm kind of curious to continue asking you. So what happened with your friends? Did any of them make it through this transition?
No. Unfortunately, obviously I'm still in contact with them and cordial and everything, but I ended up just making ANCAP friends instead. So that was a heck of a transition. So let's look at the example of education. This is a rough one, because when you're against the education system, what you're saying is to all the parents hey, what you sent your kid to, including my own parents, was 12 years of, well, whether you think it's indoctrination or not, after 12 years, did you really get your money's worth? Do they know philosophy, history, economics, morality? Can they think consistently? I mean, after 12 years of government school, the average person, excuse me, but is so fucking stupid that it's like, you have to go to college. You're not going to college. What are you, a moron? It's like, my car was just in your shop for 12 years, and you're saying it's useless unless I do another 6 months in this other place. What were we doing for 12 years? Also, not letting people opt out of property taxes. When you see old people and you're like, all right, this old woman, say she thinks what the school is teaching is garbage. Should she be able to opt out of the property taxes that fund schools, at least in Arizona? And they're like, we live in a society. Society has rules. It's like, you're totally avoiding it. You really have to put it in their face. And when I would do that, people would be like, so you're telling me I just wasted 12 years of my life? And I go, what I'm saying is no person should force other people to attend their schools. Just imagine if the Christian church did it. Without us, there wouldn't be morality. People would not even know the 10 Commandments if we didn't force kids into church and force them to fund Bibles and send people giving out sermons everywhere. Telling people that they wasted their time, that it's an immoral use of time, and that it's coercively funded, it's terrible. So no, I didn't keep any friends, unfortunately. Not any that are like, really close that I can always talk to, but I exchanged them for ANCAP friends. It was probably the best trade I think we've ever made. Maybe the Babe Ruth trade was a lot better, but me trading status friends for nonviolent friends, that I gotta say was a great one.
That's great. It kind of makes me wonder if it is really possible, maybe for people watching this YouTube video, put in the comments below, is it possible for a real anarchist, someone like us talking here, that can be an actual really good friend with a real statist, a true hardcore statist? I actually almost wonder if it's even possible, because they're kind of like really at far ends of a belief system there. It's kind of going to be every single minute of every day running across examples that you're going to point out, like, you ever notice how this sucks? Did you see those road pirates over there? We don't need those things, right? It's just going to be irritating to be around for each other, right?
Oh, definitely. Can you genuinely be friends? I gotta say, I think the nature of friendship is total trust and total honesty. Now, when you come up to someone and you just throw Lysander Spooner at them, then you don't expect them to flip at that moment, because we are up against 12 years. Thank God the anarchist who helped me out was patient with me, because I didn't just respond like, I guess the state is illegitimate. Now I've gone from socialist to voluntarist overnight. It's not like that. So I can be very patient with people over a long period of time. But when I've given them so many examples again and again and again of how these things would be totally immoral for any other organization except the one that's trained the populace in government schools to engage in the erroneous belief in authority, at that point, you can't put them on the same level as someone else who has really gone through the journey you have and really been willing to say, I was wrong about this. I'm going to trade in this belief for another because it's morally superior. I think you can definitely be cordial and have common interests and really enjoy your time with others, but there's nothing, I can't really say it's a genuine friendship when one person either won't admit they're wrong or will continue to advocate violence without having a justification. I can't say that's a genuine friendship in the true sense of the word.
Yeah, the reason I kind of like don't know for sure is because I have no statist friends, so I don't know if it's possible. Like I just, and maybe that's sort of like to your point. It's like we're so far away that we can't even become friends. You know, like I can't even imagine how I'd become friends with a statist. Like, I just, yeah. So put the comments down below though if you are an anarchist and you have statist good friends that you hang out with all the time and it's not a problem, and even put some examples down below of how you make it work. It's sort of like relationship counseling here. It's like, how do you actually make that work? Do you just never mention anything political, or are you both just really easygoing, right?
Yeah. What I like to do with friends is just get their opinion on like one thing, because everyone is a voluntarist in some way of their life. I mean, maybe Jeffrey Dahmer and Henry Kissinger aren't. Everyone else really has a libertarian aspect to them. So if you say to, let's start with like a leftist who says that prostitution should be legal. Tulsi Gabbard, the presidential candidate, has pretty much said, yeah, prostitution should be legal. It's like, okay, why? What is the difference between prostitution and a guy simply just going up and having his way with a woman against her will? What's the difference? And immediately you see consent is the difference. Or what's the difference between slavery, what we used to have, and me hiring someone to do work? When you put that on them, you can say, here's why I see these things as different, because morality, says the voluntarist, is rooted in consent primarily. That's what makes fraud different from a contract or an agreement. So when you focus in on, let's go with religious freedom. Why should you have the right to practice a religion? What if it's wrong? What if it hurts you? What if you spend tons of money and it ends up really negatively affecting people because it doesn't allow them to look at the world in a rational manner? These are negative effects that can arise because people are free. You still have the right to believe in whatever religion you want, but then they'll say, so long as you don't enforce it on me. Well, that right there is the libertarian in you. Now, once we apply that consistently to everything else, then you're really on the right track. But yeah, it is rough when things come up, when they're like, oh, when you're just like at the bar or something, and then the football game will be like, this is dedicated to our men and women in service. And I'm like, you know, there is no way that Assad was behind that attack. So the fact that they're coming back from Syria, and Mattis basically explained, as you can see in a Newsweek article, that there was no evidence behind that. No, Gaddafi was not giving his troops Viagra to engage in mass rape. They had been planning that invasion for decades. And look, if someone invaded America, would you ever support those troops? I mean, blindly obeying orders is not worthy of getting this standing ovation and people in bars, you know, taking their hats off. It's like, ugh. So yeah, it's difficult to go about life and just see all these terrible things that you never saw before. Once the veil is totally lifted, it's like, oh, you're an officer. Instead of thank you for your service, it's like, so you do things because some congressman wrote it down on paper and voted. You think that's okay? You think that's worthy of respect or something? So, yeah, it's difficult when you see it all around you once the statist veil has been lifted.
Yeah, and you brought up, it's even hard just, you know, getting through regular life. You brought up the national anthem, things like that. I like hockey. I just enjoy watching it. I'm from Canada originally, and I just try to show up after the national anthem because I won't stand for it. And when I don't stand, it's like someone's always got to say something, and then I get into like I'm like, yeah, you're a slave, and they're like, yeah, you stand, and I'm like, you're a bootlicking slave, and then so life is a little difficult as an anarchist sometimes living in this society. But one of the things that I hear from a lot of people people is that they have a really hard time finding like-minded friends, anarchist, ANCAP friends. Sounds like you didn't have too much trouble. Did you meet a lot of people just locally or online, or how did you do that?
I went to a conference called the Institute for Humane Studies, and they are a libertarian organization. They have a website called learnliberty.org, and I said, all right, that's where I'll go to meet people. I think I was a minarchist at the time, and I'm talking to people there, and then I meet this guy who is a big professor, and I was like really impressed to meet him. And I said, so obviously we need government for courts and police and arbitration and whatnot. What would you say is the primary purpose of the state? And he goes, I think that anything that could be done is better achieved by voluntarily funding competing agencies than coercively funding a single agency. So yeah, that's where I stand. And I go, what? So you're like a no government guy. You're like an anarchy guy? And he goes, yeah. And I go, oh my gosh, what a loser. So I go to a table after, and we're all smoking cigars and just BSing. And I said, oh, you guys are not going to believe this. I spoke with a guy earlier. He is, get ready for this, an anarchist. And they all looked at each other and they say, yeah, I've been an anarchist for about 2 years. And they were all anarchists. I'm like, oh my God, I'm surrounded by these nutbags. So that was when I first started shaking hands, exchanging numbers. And then someone said to me the old joke of the anarchist, minarchist, usually takes about 6 months is the difference between the two. And it's so funny when you see that now, because it's so true. You know you're on the right path, and you know where that path goes once you've engaged in critical thinking and applying principles consistently, rather than just saying, yeah, Bush is a total moron. It's like, okay, that's not really getting at the heart of the state. It's like, well, the problem is we need to vote the Cheneys out of there and the Obamas or something. That's not on the same path. Recognizing the non-aggression principle and the self-defense principle, the legitimacy of those absolutely ends you on that path. So going to conferences, exchanging numbers. I was actually asked I went on a rant once, and then this guy said, you got to speak at one of these things that we have. And then I spoke there, and yeah, that's pretty much how it went. I also went to a Rand Paul event that had a bunch of anarchists there. We're basically like, we're almost like ANCAP informants. We like dress like the populace, and then we just go up to them and we try to like plant these little seeds and stuff. So that was really fun. Finding areas of potential where you can meet like-minded people. That was probably one of the great benefits of becoming an anarchist.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, a lot of people come to Anarchapulco and meet a lot of people there. And I saw one in particular this year. It was a girl, I think she's from Canada, and she just brought her totally statist friend. So she's a fairly new anarchist, but she still has a statist friend. And by the end of they're actually on the Anarchapulco message board. And by the end of the conference, the statist friend was totally an anarchist. So it's like, just bring your statist friends if you do have any, bring them down. But that's definitely a great way to sort of meet people is at events like that. And there's lots of them. Just to let people know, I'll be at the Red Pill Expo, which is G. Edward Griffin's event coming up in June. I don't know if I'm going to go to Freedom Fest this year. We'll see. I'm not sure what else I got coming up, but probably some crypto events and stuff like that. So definitely stay tuned to my Dollar Vigilante events page. It's dollarvigilante.com/events to check out where I'm going to be. And of course, we just met at Anarchazona. Before that, there was another one called Anarchaportugal. And there's one coming up called Anarchadelphia, I think, in Philadelphia in September, and they're all kind of spin-offs that I have nothing to do with of Anarchapulco, and so those are definitely great places to meet people and things like that. I know that you live in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and there's quite a few libertarians and quite a few anarchists there. Of course, you mentioned, I think, Ernie Hancock earlier, but there's a lot more. There's Tim Pitchot lives there. I could go on and on. There's a lot of people. Did you grow up in the Phoenix area, or and is that how you kind of met some of these people as well, as because there's so many libertarians there?
Yeah, I'm not sure why there is sort of a libertarian spirit there here. And I really have to do something on that. But yeah, I've lived here my whole life for 23 years. And when I met Ernie, that was really cool because he had a bunch of anarchists over at his place. And then recently we had ANCAP Poland at Ernie's house, and they were giving speeches. We had guys from Venezuela and Ukraine, and they were talking about how they became anarchists in all these Eastern Bloc countries and whatnot. It was just so crazy. It was so cool to really have someone like the Ernies of the world. Amanda Rockwitz is also here. Alma, who used to be at Kokesh's Ranch, they had a big presence here for some time, at least. Larkin Rose moves back and forth between here and Philadelphia. So, yeah, it's definitely, I think there's a gun culture here that really puts people in such a way. Like on April 19th, I swear I had like 4 or 5 people mention Waco to me. Well, at the gun store, obviously. The guy's like, all right, we'll sign here because we got to make that ATF hat because you know what happens. And then we talked about Waco for some time on the anniversary. So yeah, been in Phoenix my entire life, but so many people move here from like New York, and they always bring this statist loving mindset with them to where it's like, if they could still vote for Andrew Cuomo or AOC, they really would. So I'm not sure why that's different.
Yeah, it's funny. They're leaving New York, but they'd still vote for those people. But the reason they're leaving is probably because of the effects of voting for those kinds of people over the decades. It's pretty funny. And you know, these anyway. But I did see that. I was in Phoenix recently, and man, that city is growing. A lot of people moving there. It's a very nice place. I don't blame people. It's actually one of my favorite areas in the U.S. is the entire Arizona area and Phoenix as well. So one question I like to ask some people, and I like asking both older anarchists and younger anarchists to get different perspectives. Some anarchists are older and they've been anarchists for 20, 30, 40 years, and they have a very different view than the younger people on where the state of anarchy is at. So I want to ask you, as someone who's younger, who's newer into this sort of thing, what's your take on this philosophy actually really expanding worldwide? Are you getting the sense that it's really growing, or what's your take on it?
It's so hard for me to assess this objectively because I spend so much time in the circle, even though I really try to make efforts talking to other people, even if it's just throughout my day, even if it's just at like family gatherings, I'll even still do it. As difficult as that is, I am optimistic in the sense of we have the only consistent philosophy out there. Once you really read through the works of people, like if you just take Lysander Spooner, Larkin Rose, Hans Hoppe, Tom Woods, Lou Rockwell. Or we can throw Doug Casey in there. Those people and the Tannehills, those people all came to the same conclusion with totally different starting points. That is so motivating. It's like, okay, so it's not like, well, unless people know about the Holodomor and how bad the state can get, then we could scare them into being anarchists. When you realize that it's the only consistent philosophy, that's what more so makes me excited than anything else. And obviously I remember seeing like Anarchapulco videos where it's like you, Molyneux, and a few people in the background, and this year I hear it's like 2,500 people or something crazy. So I'm like, well, maybe that's an indicator, but then again, it's a small percentage. The number of people who in the mainstream who have spoken of things like the non-aggression principle, I absolutely see that as an increase, whereas you never would have heard of it 5 or 10 years ago. The fact that there's an online presence now more than 10 or 15 years ago, that definitely levels the playing field. This Mueller report was terrific. It really delegitimized people's belief in the mainstream media, also the Jussie Smollett story. So the fact that people look at the mainstream media and say, that appears to be lies and nonsense. What they end up looking for is things like YouTube, BitChute, Minds, Steemit. And when we're on that level playing field, I think we're golden. So once we pull people there, then I'll be more optimistic than ever. But when I still see people watching CNN like, excuse me, I'm getting informed. Hold on, Don Lemon is on the screen. That is a little discouraging. But when people like Sargon or Milo comes out there, the fact that there was any knowledge of people believe in private property and they don't believe in a state because they believe in the non-aggression principle. How many people in the mainstream. Dave Smith is on CNN every now and then. Michael Malice has his own podcast on the Gas Digital Network with like Andrew Dice Clay and the lead singer of Twisted Sister. We're in a lot of places. Judge Napolitano had his own show, and he was asked if he's an anarchist, and he goes, "Do you hear me denying it?" It's like, so yeah, I think we're slowly but surely moving in the right direction, and I'm optimistic, not just because of numbers, because those can be difficult. And if you see 50,000 anarchists, how many of them are just practically anarchists because they think it'll work better? They might flick the switch overnight if they hear a good argument for statism, socialism, or fascism achieving a better end. So I am optimistic because we have the only consistent philosophy. That's what I would say.
Cool. Yeah, I'm definitely optimistic. I'm seeing so many things. There's about 1 or 2 weeks ago, I saw 2 articles that kind of blew my mind. One was in a magazine called The American Conservative, and the title of the article is "Why True Conservatism Means Anarchy." And this person essentially was saying that, we started as these conservative guys, like with real small government, but we can recognize now that even small government is still terrible. Like we basically need to become anarchists now. And 10 years ago, you weren't around at that time to see this, but like I was, there was no way this article could have ever been written. It would have been so far out of the bounds of craziness that no one could ever even put it on paper, or they'd be like laughed out of whatever place they're working at. But this article, I didn't see too much response to it, but I didn't hear any crazy, like, you're an idiot or anything like that. And then I saw another one. I don't know if you know this. Do you know the National Review? I think it's a pretty big sort of magazine.
Was that Bill Kristol's?
Maybe I should just look it up right now because I want to see what it is, but I think it's more left-leaning. I'm going to look. Oh, it's conservative news. Okay, so I thought maybe it was left-leaning, but it's a conservative. Oh, yeah, it's William F. Buckley Jr. founded it, currently edited by Rich Lowry, and it's a conservative magazine. But in any case, right after I saw the last article from the American Conservative, I see this one from the National Review, and it says the Trump era should make libertarians of us all. And it was basically saying that, holy cow, look how out of control, look, he can do almost anything. If this falls into the hands of people we don't like, this will be an absolute disaster. We should become like libertarians and just like get rid of the government as fast as possible. And that's 2 conservative magazines in 1 week saying that. So that even 5 years ago, that would have been unheard of. And now it's actually the narrative going on with at least the conservatives in some areas.
Well, Joe Sobran actually was an anarchist. He wrote an article called "The Reluctant Anarchist." And he goes, we have governments to protect us, and they're the #1 cause of genocide. They steal trillions annually. Civil asset forfeiture exists. Reluctantly, I'm an anarchist. He worked for National Review. So what they did was Buckley comes out and says, I believe Sobran has engaged in anti-Semitism. Yes. And so it's like, really, once he comes out and starts pushing consistent principles, then you throw this anti-Semitism at him. Let's assume he's the worst person ever. Just engage him on the topics at hand. And also, he was a big Clinton basher. He was in the midst of making him and Ann Coulter were going to make this big old encyclopedia A to Z of Clinton scandals. So you can believe between the anarchism, the criticism of Israel, and that, trust me, that guy got silenced real quick. But yes, Tom Woods had the guy who wrote True Conservatism is Anarchism. He had him on the show, and it was so great hearing that. Because if you really take any of the big policies that statists support, you can end up with the anarchist position. For example, the leftists will say, I really care about inequality. Bernie will say, inequality is the big issue, as will AOC. And you can say, you think it's unequal that a majority in America, that a majority of 535 congressmen coercively control 330 million Americans? Does that count as inequality? Or you're so terrified of monopolies, you think the government should have a monopoly on AR-15s? I mean, you're really against them. What do you think about that? You can ask the conservative that why shouldn't the government control food? Don't we want high quality? Don't we want to make sure? I mean, if you think defense is important, food and water are way more important, and clothing and housing. So government should just monopolize and coercively fund clothing, food, housing, shelter, and whatnot. And right away, you see, well, that would really diminish our options, and you can automatically see the negative economic consequences. And then you just say, should you be able to opt out of anything, funding anything, if you think it's nonsense, whether Obama's in there or a Cheney puppet's in there or whoever gets elected in 2020's in there? So I think we really do have a lot of answers, and that's why when something like Trump goes bad, it's like, I'm shocked that the reaction isn't bigger, actually. It should be like, you know what, progressives, we had a good run, but this is what could happen. Trump, the most evil, uniquely terrible person ever, can get into office. So I'm upset it's not bigger, but yeah, I'm glad it's there in the first place.
Yeah, the opt-out thing's very interesting. I've heard a few things lately about offering people the option to opt out, and it seems like everyone goes for it. So you can go to the Liberals, say, do you want to opt out of this war thing? Although the Liberals seem to be in favor of war now for some reason, but whatever, you just give them one thing, and they'll go, yeah. And then you go to the right side, it's like, do you think you should be able to opt out of this welfare state? It's like, yeah. It's like, okay, so how about we create a system where everyone has the opportunity to opt out? You know, I think we could almost sell it to them at this point, because I think, in a way, as much as we say, you know, anarchy's rising, people are starting to catch on, people are starting to wake up, but really the state is falling apart so fast right now. It's like hardly anyone doesn't notice how bad it is, both left and right. They're like, this is terrible, but they just don't know there's any other option, right?
And it's hard when you don't really understand the nature of the problem. When you're in Venezuela and you say the problem is Maduro, he needs to get out of here, that is a really big indicator as to not really recognizing the inherent issue that's at stake. So what I like to do is, when talking to people about opting out of stuff, is simply just apply it to any other organization. Walmart produces a lot of great stuff. Should you be allowed to opt out in funding them through employment, even though they create a lot of great stuff? Do you have the right to opt out? And people will so often say yes. Now, when it comes to things like gun control or funding police, they say, well, we run into the public goods problem where people reap the costs and benefits and they're not the same people. Well, that is exactly what the state is in and of itself. You have people, taxpayers, being forced to bear the cost of something they otherwise wouldn't do voluntarily. The fact that they can't see that consistently, and these are people with PhDs from Harvard and they're news anchors and everything, that is really rough, but it really gives us some leverage as far as having the answer to people when they come to us with problems like, I loved government for 8 years, but then in 2017 Trump got in and now government's bad all of a sudden. So we have the answer, and that is that's a great advantage for us.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, very interesting stuff. Is there any other topics that you wanted to cover, or anything, or anything you want to let people know about yourself, your website, or anything really? I'm kind of out of questions at the moment.
Well, what I like to do is focus on why people think the state is legitimate, and then really go after that issue. So take foreign policy, for example. What I did was I made a video called America's Foreign Policy of Deception, Lies, Omissions, and Criminality. And I try to make the case using primary sources that every war since Polk's War in 1847 up until Libya and Syria in this most recent time, what you have is the state basically saying, all right, even if we lose this philosophical argument because we know we're illegitimate, what we have to do is engage in a number of myths that make us legitimate. Government keeps people out of poverty. Absolutely not. What happens is, when people have more freedom, they make more mutually beneficial exchanges, and that makes them wealthier. That's why freer societies have more wealth. Well, you do have to credit us with ending child labor, right? Because there was a law, and now it's gone. Well, not exactly. See, what happens when people are more productive and they innovate more, only one person in a household has to work. Previously, like in Bangladesh, if the kids don't work, they starve. Government writing words down on paper did not end child poverty. So what they'll say is they'll really get at your heart and say, your house and your family are only safe because we protect you from the bad guys. Let's just take the Civil War, for example, saying we'd still have slavery without the state. And meanwhile, after they abolished chattel slavery, they have a draft. They force people into military service, getting their arms and legs blown off for absolute lies. Lincoln writes a letter to the New York Tribune founder, Horace Greeley, saying, look, the reason we have this war is so I could save the Union. I'm pretty indifferent to slavery. Keep it, go without it, whatever. When you see that, it's like, oh my gosh, that was an absolute lie that I believed for so long. And there were 4 states, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, and Missouri, or I think so. Those were northern states that Lincoln could have outlawed slavery in and didn't. The reason this is important is because the state lives, once you defeat it on its principles, they just throw utilitarianism at you. And when they have decades to come up with these myths, the Lusitania, for example, it happens in 1915. Woodrow Wilson in 16 is reelected on, well, you're welcome for keeping you out of that European war. And then you find out Yale University publishes the files of a guy named Colonel House, who Wilson referred to as a second personality. He has a conversation with a British diplomat, Edward Grey, and he goes, how do you think we could get into this war, crush Germany, and give Britain all the leverage? He goes, well, what if they sunk the Lusitania? That is another example of the First World War based on a lie. It was absolutely pre-planned. The German government had advertisements in American newspapers saying, don't get on the Lusitania. It's a military ship. We are going to treat it like a military vessel. 117,000 people died for that lie. I mean, as bad as 9/11 was, these are terrible atrocities that are continuously justified. The Second World War, too, there was a document called the McClellan Memo that says, here are 8 ways we could get the Japanese to attack us. I'll stop the rant there. But yeah, it goes on through 9/11, through Syria and Libya. They just got caught staging something in Venezuela, and I will give the New York Times credit on this. They said what was previously thought of as a Maduro bombing, actually camera footage tells us something else. So what they do is they throw out all these myths, babies in incubators, babies on bayonets. Janet Reno says babies are being beaten, so the FBI has to go into the Waco compound. They throw all these lies at you in hopes that you'll just abandon your rational faculties, you'll abandon principles and just say the state is legitimate. That is one thing that I think my YouTube channel has to offer. And I try to do that with a number of topics. For example, someone will say, well, we need OSHA because OSHA came in, the Occupational Safety and Health Association, and worker deaths radically decreased. So even if you're this la-la anarchist, you have to support something that's good like that. What they don't show you is the 50 years prior that these rate was going down at exactly the same pace. So those are the kind of lies that I try to focus on and expose in my YouTube channel while making sure we have a good foundation in principle to back it up.
That's great. And yeah, we could go on for days really about all the lies told by the government. Every single war the U.S. has been involved in was based on a lie. Everything's based on a lie, actually. It's pretty amazing. And you brought up earlier how people are really kind of like starting to figure out that the mainstream media is complete propaganda and lies. And that Russia thing was interesting for that reason. There's like tens or hundreds of millions of people going, wait, so what they were telling us on the news for the last 2 years straight was just all just lies, basically? They're kind of scratching their heads like, well, if that's the case, I wonder what else is lies. And I think they did a poll on the mainstream media. I think less than 15% of Americans actually think what's on there is actually like real, truthful information. And Congress has like less than 10% approval rate. So I think we're getting really close here. It's just a matter of time at this point before more people start to wake up. So any final last words, Keith? You might want to just mention your YouTube channel one more time. Any final words you want to say before I let you go?
Well, the mainstream media thing, I would just say that it's incredible that 24 hours a day, there's pretty much news on Fox and MSNBC and CNN. And what they do is they bash Trump on these trivial things. Fox does it with Obama and vice versa. The reason they do that is they can't address the heart of the issue. Trump is a murderer and just signed off on keeping things going in Yemen with the genocidal Saudis. He supported the bump stock ban. He said, take the guns first, then due process. He's theft funded by trillions of dollars a year, supports the kidnapping drug war, supports civil asset forfeiture. You have all these amazing things that are just plain evil, and they're focusing on Russian hookers urinating on a bed Obama previously slept in, according to this Christopher Steele memo. So when you see it, it's like that. The reality is that both parties are the same, and if they ever get at, both parties agree, Federal Reserve, drug war, they believe in taxation, they believe in regulation, they believe in gun control, they believe in coercively funding people overseas with foreign aid, they believe in a welfare state. Once you get that down, then you see it's totally illegitimate, and then it makes sense they're focusing on the smirk on the face of the Covington High School kid and all this other nonsense. So even if it is accurate, it's still extremely selective. For example, you can choose to report on Abu Ghraib once for 2 minutes, or you could focus an entire year on it. That's still bias in the sense of you're still choosing what to report on and what not to. So I think the mainstream media is so evil that I think that's another major battlefront. But that is my final thought. Jeff, thank you for having me on. And more importantly, thank you for getting together the biggest voluntarist conference in the world. I think that's a great step in the right direction.
Thank you. And we're in discussions about having you speak next year at Anarchapulco. We haven't decided on anything yet. We're still putting together the whole team for next year still. But definitely you're on the list of people to be considered to be speaking at the conference. So if you like this video and you want to hear more from Keith, definitely check out Anarchapulco next year. We'll have an ad for that here at the end. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share down below. We get blacklisted, banned, shadow banned, whatever you can say. It's amazing how I did a live stream of the Dollar Vigilante YouTube channel the other day. Dollar Vigilante has 250,000 subscribers. There was like 500 people on the live stream. Like they're shadow banning, they're blocking, they're banning. But what does help is if you do hit like and share. So if you're into these if you like this video, if you watch this far, you must have liked it a little bit. Hit like and share so we can at least get it out there so some more people can see it. And that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
Your rights to say what you want, think what you want, raise your kids the way you want, transact with who you want, and put what you want into your body are under attack. There's never been a time in history when this was more true than today. But at the same time, there's been an awakening of people like you who recognize that freedom is within reach, and they're turning the tables on the global elite. That's why, for the last 4 years, thousands of freethinkers and voluntarists like you had made the journey to Acapulco, Mexico to learn, interact, and create more freedom in their own lives. You may not have made it to the event, or if you did, you're likely to want to experience it again and again in your own home. I'm talking about 4 action-packed days of exciting, informed, expert speakers, all of whom are at the top of their game and all icons in the freedom and liberty movements. Visit anarchapulco.com/2019 VOD now to experience Anarchapulco and Cryptopulco 2019 as many times as you want, from the comfort of your own home or office.